You are good.
Welcome, welcome, everyone. We are here again for our third week of the speaker series called The Power to Define. This speaker series is hosted by the Pro Seminar in the African American Experience course. It is the first course, as I understand it to be, at Bowie State University, and it is part of our social justice concentration. The speaker series itself is providing an inauguration, if you will. As I let people thank you, Ms. Wedderburn. It provides an inauguration for the course, but while we are inaugurating the course, want to send a message, especially during these times, that we do indeed have the power to define. As a reminder, this speaker series promotes insights that are relevant to the psychosocial historical context of extant African American people. These insights will focus on topics such as self and racial identity, prejudice and racism, which we're here to discuss today, health and mental health, and the socialization dynamics. And of course, lastly, but not least, Lee is achievement in schooling. Previously, we went through a history in systems with Dr. Leon, went through a racial identity with Dr. Sherman, and we are here today, honored, if you will, to talk about prejudice and racism with Dr. Grace Carroll. Dr. Carroll, and I'll read this to you. Dr. Carroll has always been passionate about helping our children reach their maximum potential. She has over 5 decades experience in teaching, research, assessment, training, and program development with an emphasis on sociology of education, family, evaluation, and diversity. She received her Bachelor's of Arts degree in sociology from Stanford University, where she also received 2 master's degrees and a Ph.D. in sociology of education. Dr. Carroll holds a California teacher credential and has taught students from pre-K through college levels. She served 10 years as the director for African American student development at the University of California at Berkeley, and 3 years as the associate director of the Center for Research on the Education of Students Placed at Risk, otherwise known as CRESPAR, at Howard University, and this is where I know her. Dr. Carroll is currently the CEO of Wordsmith Jr. LLC, where she focuses on facilitating literacy among young children, particularly African American children. I must add, however, that Dr. Carroll is a gem. She is a leader in the field as far as I'm concerned, and so many others, and she holds true to a mentor perspective. I met Dr. Carroll when I when I was a graduate student at CRESPAR. And I have to say that one of the things that CRESPAR did and Dr. Carroll helped to facilitate is to have leaders in the field come and speak to us during brown bags and other meetings. Well, I'm passing that baton, or that baton has been passed to me for that matter, and Dr. Carroll is a leader in the field. The benefit, though, that Dr. Carroll brought to us at CRESPAR is that when all the other leaders in the field left, she remained, and she stayed true to her word to mentor. When we would go to conferences, she would introduce you to other leaders in the field, and she knew them by first name. For example, she asked me, "Have you ever met Asa Hilliard?" We were. I don't even know what city. I think it was somewhere in Louisiana, New Orleans. "Have you met Dr. Hilliard?" And I meekly said, "No. How would I ever meet Dr. Hilliard?" She said, "Come on over here, Asa Hilliard." And she introduced me to Asa Hilliard, and the three of us had a conversation. And I'm having a conversation with giants, and Dr. Carroll facilitated that. That's just one out of several examples. And I'm only one person out of several examples. So we're honored to have Dr. Carroll here to talk about her work that, to me, transcends time. And both of us suggest that this is an unfortunate case that it transcends time, her work in MEES, and I'm going to allow her to further explain that. But without further ado, because I can talk forever about Dr. Grace Carroll, she is like family. She is family. I told her just the other week, I love you to pieces, and I mean it. Because it's really gracious for her to be here this afternoon and this evening. So without further ado, Dr. Carroll, it's all yours.
Hi, and thank you everybody for inviting me to this, I guess, inaugural speaker series. Today, a little bit of background. I retired some years ago, and I have always been fascinated by how we as people of color respond to race and racism, particularly how it impacts young children, how they develop their self-concept. And so this fascination started very early in life when I was sharing with Sean that I and my cousin were both named after my grandmother. Her name was Grace. However, both her sons were in the military. I'm 71, so they were serving in the Middle War during the Korean conflict. And they were far apart from one another and didn't know that the other had named their child Grace. We were a few months apart. And my mother happens to be Asian. He was stationed in Japan. And my cousin, when we both came to the house, there was a color difference because of genetics. However, it was just very clear in my very young mind at the time that people made statements that were very negative regarding darker skin or more curly hair. And so from a very early age, that always fascinated. And I became very close to my cousin because I felt very protective at that time, even though we were the same age, because of these kinds of statements. And so as a result of that and subsequent work in the area, I've been looking at the stress associated with being Black. So the name of this presentation is MEES, A Slavery Legacy, Understanding the Stress Associated with Just Being Black. And I wanted to share my screen. I have technological challenges, but I just want to walk through this. Let's hope this works, Sean.
It'll work.
All right, so here we go. All right, and view.
Looks good.
Does it look right, everyone? All right.
Oh, almost. Okay. It started and it went black.
Oh, mine says you are screen sharing and it has the whole thing on it. It's not working?
No, maybe you can unshare and then try share it again.
Okay. I'm saying share screen. Well, maybe you might have to do this.
No, there it is.
Did it come on?
Yes.
Okay, should I just leave it like that?
On your desktop now.
How about that?
Now we're seeing it, yes.
You're seeing it?
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Okay, the name of this presentation is basically looking at MEES, and I want to describe what that means, but initially, being the elementary teacher myself, just want to go through what I like to get done in this short time we have together, just for us to gain a better understanding of our interactions around race, the how and why we think the way we do. The objective is for you to really reflect on some of the things we're discussing, become acquainted with the theoretical concept of symbolic interaction and MEES itself. But, you know, I think having these discussions in areas that we don't often discuss, or we don't often discuss honestly around the context of race and racism, because it does take a toll on us. But I'd like to end with response modes and strategies for coping, because I think we all need to leave with something that is positive or something we can do about issues that often we feel helpless about. So all of you getting your PhDs or ED, you know that you have to have some sort of theoretical construct from which you are to do your work. I used to think that was a very frustrating space to be, but you know, I was often told that there's nothing new under the universe, but you have to hook it up with something that someone else had already said. I was a very rebellious student and had some issues with it, but the bottom line, I hooked this up to the notion of symbolic interactionism. And the theory of symbolic interaction, it really stresses the significance of social influence upon the individual. That our behavior is really a result of that interaction with our environment, as opposed to like Pavlov's dogs, you know, you show them food, they salivate. It's a direct response, where we actually have a step in between a direct response where we interpret the environment. So basically, this was 4 or 5 lectures put into one slide here. Basically, symbolic interaction, the process is, I say something, I look a certain way, there's some sort of gesture emitted, any of those things. You, as a human, you interpret that gesture, you interpret how I look, you interpret what I say, and you reply to your interpretation, not necessarily what I said, but your interpretation of what I said. Are we all following? We good? Making sense? Okay, I'm assuming yes. But there's some key symbolic interaction concepts that go along with this, and they impact how we think. One is a generalizer, our view of what others think overall. The specific other. The specific other often has a greater impact, but it depends. The specific other might be your mother, a teacher, but they're denoted with a specific name that you understand. Then it becomes the significant other, someone who is significant in your mind view of things, of what's happening. And then there's a concept of the looking glass self, that you look in the mirror and you see the reflections of all these other things, what the generalized others think, what the specific others think, and what the significant others think as you look back at yourself. So therefore, when someone who has, a certain, those folks who are bulimic, who make themselves throw up, for instance, they might be very thin and look in the mirror and see a very fat person because of the disease or because of how they view other people and how they view others thinking of themselves. But all of us as human, we live in a real social reality. And the social reality is a key thought. Because, if everyone said this was a table versus a cup, and everyone agreed with it, it would be a table. So all of us live in different social realities, which I want to touch base on recently. But these are just sort of a quick overview of the symbolic interactionist concept. And I want to go to the next slide, and for you can just take a second to think about an experience where race or culture or ethnicity mattered in your own world. And I want you to reflect on what you thought, how you felt, and what you did. And although we don't have time for big interaction, I just want you to think about that for a few seconds, because often someone will say something, we have a negative response to what they said. It makes us feel bad because it's racist. But often when it comes to action, especially those in the context of jobs, in the context of being in certain circumstances where everyone doesn't have your point of view, in the context of your social, sometimes we don't take any action. And that often leads to us feeling even worse. Sometimes we overreact and take horrible actions. Again, leading to some negative responses. So it's a real juggling of life when it comes to dealing with race, because people have been socialized to think a certain way about race, and their social reality, unfortunately, sometimes might not have anything to do with reality. And we're in a perfect situation now with this with this president that we have, just living in his own social reality, but because he has shared that reality over and over with these lies, people believe that that is their reality. So I think that's a perfect example of how one's generalized others, because they're just looking at each other, the specific others, such as others who believe the way they do, their sisters, brothers, etc., and the significant other of the president leading this charge, have all of these people creating a social reality which doesn't match our social reality. Or actually, in his case, it doesn't match any real social reality that a sane person would understand. So the bottom line is that race matters. It's like the big elephant in the classroom. I mean, no matter how hard you try, because we have been brought up in a society that has featured race in so many ways, whether it denies it, ignores, whatever, it has featured race. So as a professor or as a teacher or as a principal, you go into the classroom, you're gonna know if Black person is there. As a Black student in the classroom, often you're surrounded by whites. You know when you're absent, they're gonna know you absent because you're the only Black person in the classroom, or in the boardroom, or in the principal's meeting. So it matters. And I think that's the bottom line, that some people actually would like to minimize that it matters. And there are problems along with that. And so with all that backdrop, That's how I came up with this concept of me. So I worked with the late Dr. Chester Pierce, who was my mentor, a psychiatrist and a physician psychologist, but he just did so much in the field. He talked about extreme environments. He did research in the North Pole, or got data from people in outer space, because he thought extreme environments make you think and act differently than the everyday normal environment. So we came up with this concept of mundane, extreme environmental stress. That dash was not supposed to be there, because in the last slide, it was on 2 lines. But mundane, extreme environmental stress. And what that is basically, it's the stress associated with just being Black or identifying as being Black. It's mundane because it happens every single day. Chet Pierce pointed out that you cannot walk out of the house without at sometimes thinking about your Blackness, whether it's what someone says, whether it's how you look, whether you're worried about your hair. But it is so mundane that if we tripped on it all the time, it would be problematic. So it's like breathing. We get used to being in our Black skins, but it has an extreme impact on your psychological well-being, often not associated with anything that you've done, but because of the social context and all those things we talked about briefly previously, have an impact on how you think. If you're a little Black child, dark-skinned Black child, and everything associated with being dark is bad, it's going to impact how you think, unless there's some strong intervention early. So it has an extreme impact on your psychological well-being, but it's environmentally induced. Little kids don't come in thinking, I'm Black, I'm white. The environment that they live in, the social reality, creates this for them. But nonetheless, it's stressful, and not the natural eustress of growing up. Eventually young kids get pimples and they go away. It's part of the eustress of growing up. I'm talking about the distress that causes often many of the diseases that are disproportionately in our communities, many of the issues that we're facing in terms of interacting with one another. So it's the distress that we're talking about. I want to go back real quick to the social context. Social context is created by our history. Our history didn't start in slavery, but if you read a lot of the textbooks and what kids are learning about our presence here, it's almost like we started here as slaves, period. They don't talk about the great explorers that came before Columbus. They don't talk about the great societies or where civilization started. Often, even when I was in school, which was a long time ago, they even had Egypt separated from the continent of Africa, and it had a little, it was like the little L all by itself, because they did admit that, science and math, all this started in Egypt, but they separated it from the continent. It was like an island to itself. So that history is not only revisionist, but it's just housed with a lot of lies that often are negative and have negative impacts on African Americans or people of color. There's often this Black or dark equals bad equation that's going from way back when, the good guys had white, the bad cowboy came in with a Black hat. I mean, it's so ingrained that we've often taken it for granted. And then I think it's really important to understand that another social contextual thing that makes our social reality different than others is Darrell and Samuel Bent were 2 professors at Stanford. And Darrell talked about how whites had a non-conscious ideology. They don't have to think about race. They can go to school, get service providers, and everything could be white. I mean, it might be unusual for them to even have a Black interaction with somebody who is above them in any way. Whereas Black families have to think of, okay, I want to maybe take my kid to a better school, but in this better school is all white, he might be the only child. There are things that we have to think about that others don't. So Bem talks about this non-conscious ideology that whites often have that make them impervious to the kind of things and understanding the social context that Black folks live in. But ultimately, we are in a very different social reality. And the history I mentioned to you, and I mean, there's a zillion there's just so many examples. But there's also something what we call microaggressions that happen as a result of this MEES environment that we live in. And these are subtle, often nonverbal insults that are directed toward us, often done automatically, sometimes because of the non-conscious ideology, they don't even know. They're sort of layered insults, and they're often based on how you look. You know, little statements like, I mean, I'll never forget how when Colin Powell got his big job, you know, they said things like, oh, he's so well-spoken. I mean, he was the same thing with the president, they're so well-spoken. I mean, these people have degrees, you know, it's like the expectation was that they weren't supposed to be well-spoken. So they're little teeny things like that. Oh, you have good hair, you know, implying that if it's curlier, it's not good hair. You know, little microaggressions that happen, you're special. And that's the third thing. Good is often, you're special. We're going to take the good Black people and you're special. And the implication is all the rest of the Black people are not good and they're not special. Good thing is something that's separate and you're special, but bad things in this MEES environment are generalizable. And I mentioned what Ben's non-conscious ideology was. So I think it's important that we understand these different manifestations of different social reality. I mean, I had just, when the OJ verdict came up, I'll never forget, at Howard, everybody was cheering. I guess they were in the big hall there, cheering, happy. And I was so happy that they gave the mic, because I was in California, but I saw this happening. They interviewed people. They put the mic in front of a young brother, and I'll never forget his words. He said, I don't care if OJ killed her or not. I'm just happy that for a change, a brother got off. And it wasn't as if he was being mean or angry. That's how he generally felt. He was honest. Juxtaposition now, same time, same date, they went to Smith College. The women were crying. I mean, big tears. I don't see how this could ever happen, the injustice. I mean, they're two exact same verdicts that they watched, and they had such different responses because of the different social realities. I don't need to go through the police prison situation. We have that over and over. We have seen that, especially during the pandemic, when we're just watching this murder happen over and over, and the injustices. How they treated President Obama, you know, they got upset because he had on a beige suit. And I mean, I don't even think I want to go through, because this man right now who's in the office has done so many things that had Obama done one of these things, they would have tarred and feathered him, okay? But one thing I want to point out, and I was fascinated by suicide data, but I want to share with you, to me, this really shows a difference of social reality, not that those others didn't. But this, when I was at Crestbar, we looked at suicide data for Black men. Well, we looked at for all groups, but I focus on Black men. And if you look at that chart, we kill ourselves in the high productivity years, between 25 and 45. You see where, no matter, I mean, each one is a different time year, but the pattern is consistent. You know, if we make it past 65, we're pretty good. We're not gonna kill ourselves. Now I want to show you the white male suicide rate. If you were just doing research and saw these two charts, you would think you were plotting two totally different phenomena. White men kill themselves when they retire at higher levels. And when you look at those two charts together, it's just unbelievable that you're charting the exact same data for Black and white. Now, the reason I didn't put women in there is because white women kill themselves all over the place, and there was no way I could explain it. But Black women have the same pattern as Black men. It's almost as though we've done so well, but then we might hit a glass ceiling. You know, it's somewhat frightening. But I have a caveat to that, in that, and I shared the link with Sean, Professor Coleman. Over the past 10 years. Now, these data, I collected data at the end of the 90s, but in the last 10, 15 years, our rates have jumped up phenomenally all across the board. And I don't know why, but the data is there. There was an article that I shared with him, and he can share with you later, that talks about how over this past couple of decades, these patterns are changing for us. So based on document reviews, focus groups and interviews, I'm trying to stay within my time here, I talked to lots of families. I mean, I did papers and presentations around MEES. And there are 8 response modes that emerge. Note, however, that as I'm going to go through them very quickly, that the response modes are frequently learned, and they're based on your day-to-day living context. They're not mutually exclusive. I mean, you engage in 4 or 5 of these response modes in a day. They begin very early in life. And they often serve as a self-defense mechanism. But irrespective of how you use them, they have a great impact on your identity. But with time, with changes, with different perceptions regarding social reality, they can be changed. So here we go. These are the 8 that came out from, I guess it was hundreds of interviews over a period of years. Our first response mode is that you can ignore, suppress, excuse my language here. Like, and we often do that. You know, it's like you're walking down the street, you hear something, you really want to curse the person out or kick their butt, but you don't have time, space, or energy at the time. So you ignore it. Someone says a name, you say, they're not talking to me. A second response mode is self-evaluation. That's a situation where I see these young girls who truly do not think they're beautiful because of skin color or hair texture or body image. Whatever it is, often we look at ourselves as less than. And that's very scary. That's very scary. A lot of us just become anti-white. You know, I mean, I have colleagues who say I deal with white folks all day long. When I come home, I don't see anything white. And that's different than being pro-Black. You can be very affirming of Africans and Africanness and Blackness without having to make someone else feel lower. Unfortunately, in our society, that has not worked in the other way around. Pro-white has often been negative Black. Then if you look at those, I don't even want to call them names, but anyway, there are a lot of people who identify with the oppressor. I'm trying to think of, I'm blanking his name, the prison study, the infamous prison study, where after students were in this experiment, often people who were prisoners started identifying with the prison guards because they had the goods. Phil Zimbardo did this study at Stanford. It was well known throughout the world, but bottom line, we do have people who, if, you know, there are some Black people who are gatekeepers, who are more negative toward Blacks than even whites. Then you have a consequence that many of us engage. Sometimes you just get pissed, you're angry, you're upset over the issues that deal with racism. And, you know, when Jesse used to talk about Jesse Jackson used to say, keep hope alive, that was a real thing because so many people become hopeless. I interviewed a lot of parents who the father lost a job, tried his hardest, could never find a job, was locked out of certain kinds of fields because of a variety of things that dealt with racism. And the family, he became hopeless. The wife, I remember one interview where the wife was just wanting to get help and try to build her husband's hope that something better would happen because he had been knocked down so many times, you know. But then many of you probably feel and have done the 8th response mode. You might have had mothers, grandmothers, or someone that says, you gotta be twice as good to get the same thing that someone white might have had. And you become overachievers. I mean, Overachievement is wonderful in the sense that you get a lot done, but it's also very stressful. And a lot of people who are overachievers often even have an imposter syndrome, like, you know, I'm doing all this and I got this great job and everything, and they almost feel that they don't deserve it. But all of these issues can cause stress. And I want you to think about yourself right now in those response modes. And think in your head, do you engage in these? And if so, which one do you think is your primary one? Why do you think you use any particular response mode? There are pros and cons in any of them. How does it impact you? How does it impact your psychological well-being? And if you have ideas for others, I mean, as I said, I talked to 100, these are the 8 that were distilled, but some people really have difficulty in switching their response mode to match the circumstances that's going to give them the best outcome. You know, you see people who walk around, you see young brothers, young sisters who are angry all the time. It's like they can't get past the anger, or folks who are hopeless most of the time. So it's very important for us to understand why these things happen and start doing things to mitigate the negative outcomes. So I wanted to end, I got a few more minutes, 10 more. I wanted to end with what has become my top 10 negotiating strategies. Now, there might be more, but these are things that I found when working with families, with working in classrooms with kids, with working with groups, therapy groups. These are 10 negotiation strategies. Now, clearly, if there was an inoculation we could give you to make you immune to racism, many of us would want it. There is not a single inoculation. Because of social reality, the social context we all live in, everyone's response might be different given their circumstances. But these are the top 10 negotiating strategies that were distilled based on these conversations and these focus groups with folks. 1, acknowledgement. It sounds simple, but there are some people who say things, oh, we're post-racial. I think after what's happened over the last COVID time, not too many people saying we post-racial anymore. But there was a period of time where, you know, the president, well, we got a Black president, so we don't have to worry about racism anymore. And then we see how they kicked his butt and didn't let him do most of the things he wanted to do. And, you know, people really would love for us to live in a post-racial society, but we're not taking much action. Well, I'm not talking about you or me, but collectively, the society has not taken much action to really acknowledge the racism and acknowledge the fact that it exists. The second thing is you gotta have accurate history and context. And that's hard. As a teacher working with young kids, my granddaughter goes to she's in 4th grade and goes to an Afrocentric school. And I so appreciate it and wish that all Black kids could have that kind of, as I said, not an inoculation, but something to help them very early to understand that they come from kings and queens. We did a virtual tour of Ghana, and we had to make it clear that if you are here in the States, you come from the strongest stock of people that ever existed on this earth. People were captured, beaten, made hundreds of miles treks to the slave castles. Some who didn't make it were left out as bait so that they would be eaten by animals so that others could go through. They were taken to places where they were branded. They had to live in places like Amina Castle, sometimes for months. Then they had to do the Middle Passage. To survive all that is amazing. And so it's important that children know and that we have this accurate historical, not the revisionist historical information that is often shared. It can be painful, but I think framed in proper ways, it can be so uplifting. The third one, it goes back to what your grandmother said about being better than. If you have great skills, and all of you are in school now to generate a higher skill level. At least then when you don't get a job, you got to know in your heart, I got the skills. It's their loss. It's important for you to understand that you are not an imposter. You have the skills. Okay. And that is something that the definition of skills can be reformulated in ways that we can almost use what kids know as a springboard to what they can know and what they can do. Unfortunately, sometimes skills are boxed up and they're taught in certain ways. I mean, there are a lot of kids, a perfect example, a lot of kids can learn geometry and algebra even before they learn some basic math skills. And we have to circle back with those kids because they're excited about some things and not others, to make them understand that skill set can all come together. It's often hard, and our kids are often labeled as low achievers or not skilled or put in these classrooms when it's the fact that we have not generated the strategies to understand the skill sets our children come into the class with. The fourth thing I think is really important, you got to increase your autonomy. And my students tell me this all the time. They call me up now talking about, Dr. Carroll, they're MEESing with me, but I'm doing my autonomy thing. And I ask them, do they remember what that is? And they always say yes. Increasing autonomy means increasing your ability to control three critical things: your time, your space, and your energy. One of the children said, I remember it better by calling it set, your space, your energy, and time. I didn't care how they remembered it. But the bottom line is, none of us are fully autonomous. We all have obligations. But if you work very early, start creating and having your family and kids start creating understanding that they want to learn to control these things. I mean, during slavery, you had to move off the sidewalk or the wooden plank, because that space, you have to let a white man pass. In prison, they tell you when you can get up, get down, when the lights go on and off, okay? Who bunks with you? Many of us who have skills often have a problem dealing with autonomy. Just because you can do something well doesn't mean you need to do it all the time. You need time for yourself at times. You get burned out, and when you get burned out, you're not going to be good to anyone if you die. And many of our giants have died early because they have stressed themselves out, not being able to say, no, I can't do this right now, not being able to preserve a space that is for them. So that's a very important one. Number 5, increase your psychological safety. By this, I mean, 5 and 6 go together. I mean, purposeful interaction, psychological, they really go together. But I have these pictures of family, you know, of fraternity sororities, for meetings, for being mentors. If you're in a psychologically unhealthy entrapment kind of work environment, it's going to eventually wear on you. Sometimes we can't help it, but the bottom line is we need to create spaces that we can honestly say, that's racist, and someone can understand what we're talking about as, oh, you're paranoid. You don't know how many times I've been called paranoid. I'm okay with it. But the definition of what paranoid is another one of those things that depends on social context and social reality. All right? And it's a difficult thing to balance, because clearly, you know, if you're walking into, I tell people, you know, these are 3 examples I use in the classroom. You walk into the restaurant, you know you're next, but they see a white family that came in after you. It makes you feel a certain kind of way, but maybe that white family did have a reservation and you didn't. You just don't know. Unless you're in a situation where clearly there are no reservations. Or here you are, Black History Month. My students relate to this one. Black History Month. You're in the same class with all the other white students. The professor is being magnanimous that day, so he puts some obscure Black history fact on the board. and you're feeling like everybody's looking at you like you're supposed to know that Black history fact. And you're screaming, I went to the same damn white schools that you did. They didn't teach me that either. Why am I being looked at like I house all this information? It's stressful. Okay? But it's very important to understand that you have the power to create psychological safe spaces and help others create psychological well spaces for their own well-being. And part of that is to be able to talk about it, to be able to let yourself go and be with friends or help mentor someone. So that purposeful interaction and psychological safety really go hand in hand. Of course, we need to value diversity. We need to move away from what Walter Allen described as culturally deviant and the kind of things that make, when we do something different, it's bad. We need to move more towards something where there are cultural variations and it's not hierarchical. That the bottom line is, if in fact Asians do things a certain way, it doesn't mean that they're wrong and we're right, or that it's good or bad. It's that it's variant. It's not cultural relative. It's not cultural deviant. We have to focus on it's a variation. And it's sometimes very hard for us to do that. You know, you got folks, adios folks saying that if you weren't born in the United States through slavery, you're not Black. I mean, you have Jamaicans and West Indians who sometimes have issues when they're mistaken for African American. I mean, we have so much that binds us together. We have to also understand that there are things that set us apart that we have to appreciate. And it's a different mindset when you don't think of it as deviant or relative to what you are, but just a variation of the human experience. The eighth thing, you have to create safety nets. You have to encourage positive risk-taking behavior. You know, it's like, too often our parents want us to be safe. And there's nothing wrong with being safe. Given what's happening with the police, we do have to teach children how to handle that. But if you don't take any risk, you're not going to be able to go beyond a certain point. So many of our students don't have safety nets. Some of my Cal students were many of them first-generation students. And I'll never forget this one student who had his backpack, came to the office regularly when I was there as a staff member. And I thought he was fine. He had flunked out of school, but he still walked around with his backpack because he was too ashamed to go home. Had he known that there was a safety net corrected, he wouldn't have had to flunk out. Had he mentioned it earlier, as opposed to embarrassment, we could have had him get incompletes. So it's important to let people know that you are their safety net, or that they have a safety net, so that they don't go too far in negative risk-taking behavior and not really have the opportunity to take a positive risk-taking behavior. Safety nets are created, I mean, it could be your immediate family. It could be your family of choice. It could be your sorority. But you have to be able to, because all of us are going to fail. All of us something's going to happen. That's inevitable. But if we know we have a safety net around us in some way, we're able to bounce back much greater. And the last two things, I think, I can't tell you how I focus on the physical health, mainly because my family is so rife with people who haven't taken their physical health seriously. We know enough about physical health for us to live to be 100. We just don't act on it. We don't share it. The type of food you eat, the exercise you get, it's just very important. Because as I said earlier, you can't help yourself or anyone else if you become victimized by poor health. Now, clearly some of it is genetic and there are things we can't help. But going back to autonomy, we need to take control of the things we can control. And then finally, the spiritual connection, whether you pray, chant, go to church, whatever you do, bad things happen to good people. And we don't have an answer for why. So often, we have to understand that there are things that are bigger than us, the things that we don't control. And sometimes a spiritual connection can keep you grounded in that level of understanding that there are just things that might not be able to be controlled by us. And many people find comfort in that in dealing with race and racism. So, these me struggles are going to be ever present. They're always trying to control your mind, your identity. And these are, kind of things that I think we can get embattled and engrossed in such ways that it becomes a negative pull. We have to work on changing that around and changing the narrative, framing issues around solutions, getting positive communities, trying to change our communities in positive ways, understanding that the media lies. Just because you read it don't mean it's true. So all these things I think are important for us to think about within this context. And finally, I just listed some of the things that you can find on any health page, but I just thought it was important that I list them so you'd have them if you get sent the PowerPoint. But it's just important, for us to do these things to keep ourselves as stress-free as we can in the context of a situation that we have not voluntarily put ourselves in, but because of race and racism, we are in. So I would like to end to say you have the power to end your MEES battles. I'm a little bit over my time. I try to make it, so I talked to 3 minutes over.
You're perfect.
And there we go. Okay, sure.
You're perfect. Thank you, Dr. Carroll.
You're so welcome.
Well, I'd like to take an opportunity to I'm going to put this link back into the chat, the link for Akira's book club. So that's there. Dr. Carroll, well, let me just say that everyone, and I'm not sure if you can see it because I have a virtual background, but let's see. I'm not going to even try it anymore, but I have what do you call this? A handbook?
I just call it a handbook. It was based on, let me get up.
Yeah, I'm showing it now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone can get this handbook from the website Akira's Book Club. It's actually the last book on the site. But Dr. Carroll, can you just briefly describe Akira's Book Club and the types of books that are there?
Well, basically, when I retired, I'm 71 on Saturday, and when I retired from academia, my passion always has been for little children, and thinking kids need to learn how to read because you can explore. I mean, I explored the whole world when I was young because my mother couldn't speak English. And the only argument I ever remember her having with my dad was because she bought from a traveling salesman an encyclopedia set. Remember way back in the day, they used to knock on your door and sell them? And she bought them and he was so upset because she spent all this money. But she said, I can't read, I can't teach them. So I want them to learn. And so we learned very early and you could explore so much. So my passion has always been little kids. It's just that they didn't pay enough. That's why I stayed in school and ended up teaching colleges. But bottom line is, I went back to focusing on literacy. So we created a series of a dozen books with titles like, Can You Look Around and Find the Nouns? Do You Have the Nerve to Learn About Verbs? And so those are the 12 books that we use, not necessarily thinking of myself as an author, because my daughter did most of the books, but to use as tools to work with schools and nonprofits who work with young kids. And the MEES handbook was written right after Katrina. Long story, but bottom line was written right after Katrina. And I was asked a few years ago if I would put it back online. But since I moved over to children's book, I just added it to the Akira's Book Club. So we work with nonprofits, schools, and families around literacy and young kids. And during COVID, we had 4 major giveaways of book bags filled with our books and tools for schools.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll. Dr. Carroll, you are a gem. I mean, I can't stop gushing over you. I appreciate you so much for coming and spend this time with us. I want to open up the chat for any questions for someone if they want to type in your questions, and I'll read them out. I'll start with a comment though, while some of us are formulating our questions. You might remember Darla Scott, the now Dr. Darla Scott, has joined our session today. For those who may not be quite aware, Dollar and I call her Dollar May, she calls me Shawnee. We go back to 1999 when both of us were graduate students, both working at Crespar, getting the same tools and getting the same mentor and mentorship. Dollar says, amazing book and books, by the way.
Thank you.
Amazing books and books. So I'm going to see if there are any more questions that come through the chat. But in the meantime, I'll start us off. Dr. Carroll, is there a difference in the impact on African Americans between these episodic misfortunes and compared to the everyday? You know, is there a difference between being beat up by the police, for example, being an episodic misfortune, compared to, you know, just the everyday, following in the store? And
I think it's cumulative.
Yeah.
There's definitely a difference because one, you have the immediate response and it is obvious, it's direct. You can feel it, you can touch it. You can tell your mother about it. You can call your lawyer about these episodic things.
Yes.
The MEES factor is things that you don't have that handle on. You often question, am I just being crazy? Or did she just call me a da-da-da-da? Or are they not asking me my question because I'm the only person of color in the room? I mean, you question these things, and you know, it is as I said, a delicate balance that you have to be very self-assured in your own presence, because it might be true, but it might not be true. But their lack of understanding our space, that whole notion of, you know, them living in their own world, often they won't see these things. And sometimes when you point it out to them, they just get real indignant. Well, that's not what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying our social reality is quite different. So yes, there is a difference between the episodic and the ongoing MEES factor. But I'm just saying they do have a cumulative effect.
Absolutely.
Like, I'm gonna give you one quick example. I have a student who, at Cal, real wonderful student. She swam every morning, Black student. Everyone liked her. She was real sweet. One morning, she just went off. They called me and asked her if I could talk to her. And come to find out that her morning routine, someone asked her to leave the pool because they were now going to do such and such. And she did. But then someone on the quad said something to her. And I guess all the stuff that had happened, and a lot of stuff came out. The straw that broke the camel's back was that person saying something. So many of us are housing these things inside of us, and something can snap us just like that.
Yes.
And that is the result of the cumulative effect of MEES to me.
Sure. Thank you. I have a couple of comments in the chat. I have one from Janae Carpenter, who says, I brought my book. This is awesome. Please invite her back. But and a question from one of our graduate students, Cynthia Thomas, who says, you briefly mentioned a presentation at school. Is there also a curriculum in the works?
I'm retired, sweetheart. I really appreciate it. I've been telling folks I'm retired for the past 7 years. I have worked with different groups to deal with curriculum. I run a Saturday, well, I don't run, I was the evaluator and part-time developer of a Saturday school that I was sharing with Sean for kids from pre-K through third grade. And we do serious inoculation. We use Afrocentric habits, rituals, and routines. We make sure they see Black stellar people as their speaker, and we have them do activities that focus on their genius and their greatness. I just feel that the earlier the intervention, the better. Intervention is much easier. I mean, prevention is much easier than intervention. So I sort of went overboard. As you speak to my kids, you know, coloring books were all colored with Black kids. The Disney characters were all colored Black before I gave it to them. I didn't let interracial couples, even though my mother is Japanese, into the household when my family was there. I did a little extreme, I know, but I just really wanted them to have a healthy sense of Blackness before the world told them otherwise.
Sure. And
told them the lies that they, you know, had to deal with, and all of us continue to deal with today.
Yes, thank you. Cynthia Thomas says, I our loss, but it would be a tremendous gain for our community. I have a question, however, from our graduate student, doctoral student, soon-to-be Dr. Robert Johnson. Can you explain the difference between non-conscious ideology and social consciousness?
Oh,
Going by Kwame Ture.
Okay. Quite a world of difference. Okay. In terms of, I mean, I think when you think non-conscious ideology, I deal with regarding the BEM's work with just white folks. I am sure that it could be adapted and dealt with in terms of Black folks too. But I think of non-conscious ideology, the fact that the world revolves around you. Everything around you is white. You got white friends, you got white family, you got white social workers, you go to school, there's white teachers, a white principal. The whole world revolves around whiteness. History books have whiteness all around you, everything. So you don't have to consciously think about anything else. You don't have to think about how does this Black child fit into this? You don't have to think about the kinds of things that Black parents have to deal with every day when they send their children out to the world. So that's a non-conscious ideology. In terms of social consciousness, I think that Kwame, is something that we have to work at to understand. We have to understand our history. We have to understand why a lot of Black boys wear their pants down on their butt. We have to understand why a lot of Black girls want to have blonde hair and blue eyes. We have to understand a lot of things based on the social context and the historical context that has brought us to this space now. To understand that, you will understand better a social consciousness and be able to deal with those people. And I don't mean those people in the way they say it, our peers, our family, because we all are experiencing the same thing. Some of us have just been given tools and have been blessed to have the experiences to overcome some of the things that invade our minds on a daily basis. Is that an answer? Did you?
Oh, absolutely. That's an answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Robert Johnson's got 2 thumbs up.
Okay.
So I have, one, I have a comment, and 2, I have a last question. Brett Allen, you remember Brett? Yeah, Brett happens to be on here. I shot him and a couple of friends the link to join in. He says, Dr. Carroll, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. So
thank you, Brett.
Just FYI, you are well loved, Grace. Thank you. I do have a question. It's a doozy, not that you can't answer it. It's just so large of a question. But please, in closing, if you will, answer it any way you feel appropriate, or you can, or you want to, for that matter. How do you prepare your children in the world we are living?
That's a question?
That's
okay. Now, you have to understand, my children are now 45 and 43.
Yes.
One has 2 kids, one is pregnant with her 9th. Her and her husband want 10 kids. So I deal with this day to day with these children and grandchildren. I'm very blessed in that respect. I think I alluded to some of the things earlier. I think that from in utero on, one has to build their self-esteem and their sense of self and love of their Blackness. I think you have to start very early. I mean, I can't tell you, well, I can give you some examples. I went, as I said, I think I admitted, I went a little overboard, but I just was so understanding of how they treated my cousin who was dark compared to how they treated me, even in my own family, not my nuclear family, but in the general family. Mm-hmm. It became so clear to me that we too have been brainwashed about white like is better. So I have found everything I could have found when my kids were small, read all the books, made sure that they saw these positive images. You're at a status where you have peers who are, Mae Jamison babysit Taj, my son. She's an astronaut, right? And so I'm saying I was blessed to be in an environment where I saw stellar Black people doing stellar, wonderful things. And I made a point, and that's why I enjoy mentoring. I made a point of making sure my kids knew these are the superstars that they should be looking up to. I made a point of, as I said, some of my things are not so nice, but you know, 100 Years of Lynching is a horrible, horrible pictorial book. But I made sure my kids saw it very
Yeah.
early in their life. When they were 2 and 4, I went to Ghana and stayed for 6 weeks. Um, and you just don't know what these kind of experiences do for your children. They saw a country where everybody, all the leaders and all the people in charge are Black and look like them.
Yeah.
So it's all these kind of things that you can think of that would enhance their self or who they are. And then as they get old enough to understand why other people don't understand that is important.
Sure.
You know, there was a brother who taught young boys what to say to police when they got stopped. That's very important. Yeah. When I moved to, Sean, you've been in my neighborhood. When I moved here, my son had dreads. He got stopped regularly coming here. Mm-hmm. So it's important to teach them the cautiousness because of racism, but to make sure they understand it's not because of them.
That's right.
And I want to tell one other quick story and I'll hang up here.
Oh, no, you got it. You got the floor.
And I think I mentioned it in the handbook. I'm not sure, but it stands out. There was a young woman, not a young woman I worked with for years, a wonderful late Marie Peters, who used to teach at UConn. She tells a story, and the lady told it to me as well, where her daughter and her were going shopping in Atlanta. And those women on the line know how sometimes they got those big old rooms. It's not a private dressing room, but they have little hangers and you go in and you change your clothes. And this young girl wanted to try on these coats. But the woman who counted the number of things you took into the room told her, you got to take off your coat before you can try on these coats. And the mother looked in the room and saw that there were these white women with their kids who had on coats. And instead of going off, she said very clearly, sweetheart, this woman is racist because she thinks just because you're Black, you might switch your coat out and steal a coat, where these white kids in here, they wouldn't do that. But we know that's not true. But it's on you, sweetheart. If you want to do this and stay here and get a coat from here, or if you want to leave, I'm okay with either one of it. But clearly she said it loud enough so everybody in the room heard it. So the woman was the one who was embarrassed, not the little girl.
That's right.
So we have to have these sort of protective things based on our understanding of systemic racism and individual racism.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Carroll.
You're so welcome,
Dr. Known as Grace. We're going to close up session, but I'm going to give yet another thank you. And I told Grace some time ago, Dr. Carroll some time ago, that if I was rich, that she would have a pile of money that she can just jump in the leaves. Like it'd be, you know, it'd be right there in her living room floor. It'd be like she was raking up leaves. She can just jump in and flip around in it. So instead of, I have that level of thank yous. So thank you so
well, let me tell you, I appreciate the opportunity, and I feel enormously rich by all the people like you in our lives. And I think in the long run, that's far better than money.
Well, I'll take that too. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carroll. I want to send out a couple other thank yous. I want to thank the participants that are here, my students that are here who, while there's some twisting of the arm because it's a requirement of the class, but they do come here willingly. So thank you. And to the others who are not twisted, whose arms aren't twisted, thank you very much. I appreciate my friends who showed up, Darla, Brett, Desmond, and some others. Dr. Rashid's class, I believe, joined through YouTube. So thank you for joining in that way, for supporting this event and these events. I want to also thank Conference Services, because without Ms. Wedderburn and her team, we would be doing this like it was what we were doing, three-way calls. Everybody call somebody else and somebody else call somebody else. And so we wouldn't be able to connect this way through YouTube, through streaming, through this Zoom platform without Ms. Wedderburn and her team being phenomenal. She's doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, not just facilitating this right now. She's communicating with me weeks prior to, and then follows up the day of or the day before. She says, hey, look, I got you. I'm setting you up right now. She's sending me YouTube links. So she's phenomenal in her team. So I do appreciate that. One last shout out is my son, Nicholas Coleman, who realized that my background was too dark and adjusted my Stay Powerful brand, the Powerful to Define. It wasn't too dark. So thank you, Nicholas Coleman, for being my tech advisor at home. That being said, for those who are in the closed session class, I will see you at 6:45. Give us the time to get up, get some water, get a snack or what have you. From
Thank
here
you
on,
all very much.
Grace, thank you so much.
You're so very welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.